You saved my child according to our ancestors' law. You are now my husband." The morning started quietly, just like most days in the small valley. Thin clouds moved slowly across the sky, and a light wind carried the smell of wet earth through the narrow paths between houses. Daniel woke before sunrise, as he always did. He liked the silence that came before the village stirred to life. It gave him time to think without interruption. He lived in a modest wooden house near the edge of the settlement. The place was simple but comfortable. A small table stood near the window, covered with maps, notebooks, and tools he used for his work. Daniel had come to the region months earlier as a volunteer to help improve water systems and repair damaged roads. He preferred practical work that allowed him to stay busy without drawing attention to himself. Many people in the village respected him, though he kept his distance from social gatherings. He spoke politely, helped when needed, and then returned to his quiet routine. Some thought he was shy. Others believed he carried heavy memories he did not talk about. The truth was somewhere in between. Daniel had learned that silence often felt safer than explaining himself. That morning, the air felt heavier than usual. Dark clouds gathered over the distant hills, promising rain. Daniel drank a cup of tea and reviewed his plans for the day. He intended to check a wooden bridge near the river that had shown signs of weakening after recent storms. By the time he set out, a light drizzle had begun. He pulled on his jacket and walked along the narrow dirt path. The valley was beautiful even under gray skies. Tall grasses bent gently in the wind, and the sound of birds echoed between trees. As he approached the river, the drizzle turned into steady rain. The water flowed faster than usual, swirling around rocks with growing strength. Daniel paused and studied the current carefully. He knew rivers could change quickly during storms, becoming dangerous without warning. A few villagers stood nearby, watching the rising water. They greeted Daniel warmly. One older man explained that rain had fallen heavily in the mountains overnight, causing the river to swell. Daniel nodded and moved closer to inspect the bridge. It was a simple structure made from thick wooden planks supported by ropes and posts. He examined the joints and tested the stability. The bridge still held, but the rushing water below made him uneasy.
While he worked, laughter echoed from further up the path.
A small group of children ran toward the river, splashing through puddles. Their joy contrasted sharply with the tense atmosphere created by the storm. Daniel glanced at them briefly, smiling faintly before returning to his task. Among the children was a young boy, energetic and curious. He moved closer to the river's edge than the others, fascinated by the rushing water. Several adults called out to him to stay back, but their voices were lost in the sound of the rain and current. Daniel noticed the boy stepping onto a wet rock near the bank. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then the rock shifted beneath the boy's feet. The child slipped. Time seemed to slow. The boy tried to regain balance, but lost footing entirely. He fell forward, sliding into the river with a splash that broke the steady rhythm of the rain. Gasps filled the air. Someone shouted for help. The current grabbed the child immediately, pulling him downstream. Daniel did not hesitate. He dropped his tools and ran toward the water. His mind moved faster than his body, calculating distance, speed, and risk. He knew the river was dangerous, but there was no time to think about consequences. Without removing his jacket, he stepped into the cold water. The current pushed against him with surprising force. Each step required effort, but he moved forward steadily, keeping his eyes fixed on the struggling child. The boy's small hands reached above the surface, disappearing and reappearing between waves. Panic filled the faces of the villagers watching from the bank. Daniel pushed deeper until the water reached his waist. The cold shocked his body, but he focused on breathing steadily. He lunged forward just as the child drifted within reach. Grabbing the boy firmly, Daniel pulled him close to his chest. The current tried to pull them both away, forcing Daniel to dig his feet into the riverbed. Slowly, step by step, he moved toward the shore. Voices shouted encouragement. Someone extended a long branch toward him. Daniel reached out with one hand, grasping it while holding the child tightly with the other. Together, the villagers pulled them closer until Daniel felt solid ground beneath his feet again. When they reached the bank, Daniel lowered the child gently onto the grass. The boy coughed, drawing shaky breaths but conscious. Relief spread through the crowd like a wave. A woman ran toward them, her face pale with fear. She dropped to her knees beside the child, holding him tightly. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. This was Mara, the boy's mother. She looked at Daniel with eyes full of gratitude and disbelief. Words failed her at first. She simply held her child while nodding repeatedly, as if trying to express emotions too large for language. Daniel sat back, catching his breath. His clothes clung heavily to his body, soaked with river water. He felt the tremor of adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by quiet exhaustion. Villagers gathered around, speaking rapidly. Some praised Daniel's bravery. Others shook their heads in amazement that anyone would enter the river under such conditions. Mara finally stood and faced him. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture filled with respect. Her voice trembled as she thanked him for saving her child. The moment felt deeply emotional, yet calm. Daniel shrugged gently, uncomfortable with the tension. He insisted anyone would have done the same. But the villagers exchanged looks that suggested they did not agree. As the rain softened, an elder approached slowly. He watched Daniel with thoughtful eyes, saying little. The atmosphere shifted subtly. Gratitude remained, but something else lingered beneath it, a seriousness Daniel did not fully understand. He assumed it was simply the shock of the rescue. Mara stayed close, holding her child's hand while speaking quietly with the elder. Occasionally she glanced at Daniel, her expression thoughtful rather than just thankful. Daniel gathered his tools, preparing to leave once he confirmed the boy was safe. Yet he sensed that the event had changed something within the community. People looked at him differently, not just as a helpful outsider, but as someone who had crossed an invisible boundary. As he walked away from the river later that afternoon, the clouds began to break, allowing soft sunlight to fall across the valley. The storm passed, but Daniel carried a strange feeling with him. He believed the day would return to normal soon. He did not yet know that his simple act of courage had awakened an ancient tradition, one that would tie his life to the village and to Mara in ways he could not imagine. The next morning felt different even before Daniel stepped outside. The air carried a quiet energy, as if the village had changed overnight. He noticed it in the way people greeted him, longer smiles, softer voices, and respectful nods that felt deeper than simple politeness. Daniel tried to ignore it at first. He told himself that people were simply thankful after what had happened at the river. Still, he could not shake the feeling that something else was unfolding beneath the surface. He walked toward the workshop area where he usually started his day. Several villagers stopped him along the way, thanking him again for saving the child. Some placed a hand over their hearts when speaking to him, a gesture he had seen before but rarely directed at him. Daniel felt slightly uncomfortable with so much attention. He preferred blending into the background, helping quietly without recognition. Yet today, it seemed impossible to remain unnoticed. Near the center of the village, Mara stood waiting. Her child, now cheerful and full of energy again, played nearby with other children. When she saw Daniel approaching, she stepped forward with a calm but serious expression. She greeted him warmly and thanked him once again. Her voice carried both gratitude and something deeper, a careful seriousness that made Daniel curious. "I would like you to come with me," she said gently. "The elders wish to speak with you." Daniel hesitated for a moment. He had met the elders briefly before, mostly during community meetings, but he rarely spoke directly with them. Still, he agreed, assuming it was simply a formal way of expressing thanks. They walked together toward a large circular building made from wood and stone. The structure stood slightly apart from the rest of the village, surrounded by tall trees. Daniel had always admired its quiet presence, but had never entered before. Inside, the room felt warm and calm. Several elders sat in a circle, their expressions thoughtful. They welcomed Daniel with respectful gestures, inviting him to sit. For a few moments, no one spoke. The silence felt intentional, giving weight to the meeting. Finally, one of the elders began to speak. His voice was steady and calm, carrying authority without pressure. He thanked Daniel for his bravery and explained that saving a life held deep meaning in their culture. Daniel nodded politely, unsure where the conversation was heading. The elder continued, explaining that their ancestors believed certain moments were guided by fate. When someone risked themselves to save another, it was seen not only as an act of courage but also as a sign of a bond formed between families. Daniel listened carefully, trying to understand. He assumed it was symbolic, perhaps a cultural way of honoring heroes. But as the elder spoke further, Daniel realized the meaning was more serious.
According to their ancestral tradition, saving a child created a sacred connection between the rescuer and the child's family.
In older times, this bond often led to the rescuer becoming part of the family, offering protection, guidance, and shared responsibility. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, feeling both curious and unsure. He asked respectfully whether the tradition was still followed in modern times. The elder smiled gently, explaining that while the world had changed, the spirit of the law remained important. It was less about obligation and more about honoring deep gratitude and recognizing meaningful connections. Mara remained quiet during the conversation, listening closely. Another elder added that no one would force Daniel into anything against his will. Their customs respected personal choice above all. However, they believed it was important for him to understand the cultural significance of what had happened. Daniel felt relieved hearing that. Still, he sensed that the discussion held more layers. The elder turned toward Mara and nodded, inviting her to speak. She hesitated briefly before looking at Daniel. "My grandmother used to tell stories about this law," she said softly. She believed that when someone saves a life, it means the spirits have brought two paths together. Her words were calm, not demanding. She explained that she did not expect anything from him but wanted him to understand how deeply the community valued his actions. Daniel appreciated her honesty. He realized that this was not about pressure, but about meaning. After the meeting, the elders invited him to share tea with them. They spoke about the history of the village, stories of past rescues, and the way traditions had evolved over generations. Daniel found himself genuinely interested. For the first time, he felt like more than an outsider passing through. When he left the building, the sun had risen high in the sky. Mara walked beside him in comfortable silence. "Are you overwhelmed?" she asked gently. Daniel smiled slightly.
"A little. I didn't expect something like this." She nodded in understanding.
"I know it sounds heavy, but for us, it is simply a way of honoring what you did." Children laughed nearby, and daily life continued around them. Yet Daniel felt as if he had stepped into a deeper layer of the community. Over the next few days, he noticed subtle changes. People invited him to meals more often. Elders greeted him with warmth. Even those he barely knew treated him as if he belonged. At first, Daniel resisted the attention, but gradually he began to relax. He realized that the kindness came from genuine appreciation rather than expectation. He also spent more time talking with Mara. Their conversations felt natural, moving easily between practical topics and personal stories. She spoke about her life as a mother, the challenges she faced after losing her partner, and her efforts to balance tradition with modern life. Daniel listened quietly, offering small insights about his own past. He rarely spoke about himself, but with her, words came more easily. Still, a question lingered in his mind. What exactly did the ancestral law mean for his future? One evening, as they sat near a small fire, Mara explained more clearly.
"The law is not about forcing two people together," she said.
"It is about recognizing that sometimes destiny creates connections we cannot ignore." Daniel looked into the firelight, thinking carefully. He respected the tradition, yet he needed time to understand his own feelings. The part ends with Daniel realizing that the rescue had done more than save a child. It had opened a door into a world of tradition, belonging, and emotional choices he had never expected to face. The days that followed felt calmer on the surface, yet inside Daniel something continued to shift. The village returned to its normal rhythm. People worked in the fields, Children played along the paths, and evening gatherings filled the air with quiet conversation and laughter. But Daniel noticed that his own routine had changed without him fully realizing it. He spent more time around others now, especially near Mara and her child. At first, it happened naturally. Someone asked for help repairing a fence. Another person needed assistance fixing a water pipe, and Mara often joined these tasks with her child nearby. Slowly, their lives began to overlap more often. One afternoon, Daniel helped repair the roof of a small house damaged by the storm. Mara arrived carrying food for the workers. She moved easily among them, offering warm smiles and calm encouragement. Daniel watched her quietly, noticing how people respected her strength and kindness. He had always seen her as the grateful mother whose child he rescued. Now he began to see her as a person with depth, someone who carried responsibility with quiet courage. During a break, they sat together under a tree. The sunlight filtered through leaves, creating soft patterns on the ground. "You work too much," she said gently, handing him a cup of tea. Daniel smiled faintly. "Work keeps my mind clear." She nodded but looked thoughtful. Sometimes rest can do the same. Their conversation felt easy. There was no pressure, no heavy expectation. Yet Daniel felt a growing comfort when she was near. Later that evening, he walked through the village and noticed children running toward him, laughing and asking questions. Before the rescue, they had been shy around him. Now they treated him like someone familiar. One child even asked if he would stay in the village forever. The question caught him off guard. I don't know," he replied honestly. As he continued walking, he realized how deeply the community had begun to accept him. This sense of belonging felt warm but also slightly frightening. He had lived alone for so long that becoming part of something larger felt unfamiliar. The following day, Daniel joined a small group traveling to nearby hills to gather supplies. Mara and her child came along. The path wound through open land, and the journey gave them time to talk more deeply. Mara spoke about her childhood, growing up surrounded by traditions that taught respect for nature and people. She explained how her grandmother believed that every meaningful meeting between people carried purpose, even if that purpose was not immediately clear. Daniel listened carefully. He rarely spoke about fate or destiny, but he admired how calmly she accepted life's uncertainties. At one point, her child ran ahead, chasing a butterfly. Daniel watched them with a quiet smile. "You're good with children," Mara said. "I don't know about that," he replied. "I just try to be patient." She studied him for a moment, as if seeing something beyond his words. Patience is rare. It shows strength. Her comments stayed with him long after the conversation ended. As days passed, Daniel began to notice subtle whispers among villagers. They were not unkind, but they spoke quietly about the ancestral law and what it might mean. Some seemed hopeful that he and Mara would grow closer. Others simply observed with curiosity. Daniel felt a mix of emotions. He respected the culture deeply, yet he worried about being defined by expectations rather than personal choice. One evening, an older man approached him while he worked near the river. The elder spoke calmly about how traditions were meant to guide people, not trap them. "The law is not a chain," the elder said gently. "It is a reminder that acts of courage create connections. What you do with that connection is always your decision." They eased some of the pressure he had been carrying silently. Meanwhile, his relationship with Mara continued to evolve. They shared stories, laughed about small moments, and supported each other during daily tasks. There was no sudden change, only a gradual deepening of trust. One night, as they sat watching the stars, Mara spoke more openly about her fears. "I don't want you to feel forced into anything," she said quietly. "I value honesty more than tradition." Daniel looked at her, surprised by her vulnerability. "I never felt forced by you," he said sincerely. She smiled slightly but remained thoughtful. Sometimes the expectations of others can feel heavy, even when no one intends it. He realized that both of them were navigating something larger than themselves, balancing personal feelings with cultural meaning. Over the next weeks, Daniel noticed changes within himself. He felt less restless, less eager to leave. Simple moments, sharing meals, walking along familiar paths, hearing laughter, began to feel meaningful in ways he had not expected. Still, doubts lingered. He wondered whether he was simply drawn to the comfort of belonging, or whether his feelings for Mara were truly growing. One afternoon he traveled to a nearby town to purchase tools. There, an outsider who knew him casually warned him to be careful about becoming too involved with traditions he did not fully understand. "You might lose your freedom," the man said. The comment stayed in Daniel's mind during the journey back. Freedom had always been important to him. He had built his life around independence. Yet he also felt that true freedom might include choosing connection rather than avoiding it. When he returned to the village, Mara's child ran toward him with excitement, showing him a small drawing made that day. The drawing showed 3 figures standing near the river. A simple image, but it made Daniel pause. He realized that his presence had begun to matter deeply to someone else. That evening he sat alone outside his home, watching the sunset paint the sky with soft colors. He thought about the past, about loneliness, about choices he had avoided because they felt complicated. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a future that included others. The part ends with Daniel understanding that his feelings toward Mara and her child were no longer shaped by tradition alone. Something real was growing, something built on shared experiences, trust, and the quiet possibility of love. The days grew warmer as the season slowly changed, but Daniel felt a quiet tension building around him. Life in the village continued with its usual rhythm, yet he sensed that people were waiting for something. Conversations paused when he approached, and elders watched him with thoughtful expressions that held both patience and expectation. He tried to focus on his work. Fixing broken fences, repairing pathways, and helping improve the water system kept him busy. Physical work had always helped him avoid complicated thoughts. But lately, even when his hands were occupied, his mind drifted back to the same question. What did he truly want? One afternoon he visited the river alone. The water flowed calmly now, far less dangerous than the day of the rescue. Standing there, he remembered the moment everything changed. The rushing current, the fear in the villagers' voices, and the instinct that pushed him forward without hesitation. He realized that the rescue had not only saved a child, it had brought him into the center of a story he had never planned to be part of. Later that day, an elder approached him with a gentle smile. The elder spoke kindly, explaining that the village planned to hold a gathering soon, a ceremony meant to honor acts of courage and strengthen community bonds. Daniel listened quietly, sensing that the gathering carried deeper meaning. The elder confirmed this gently. "The ceremony will also be a moment for you," he said. "Not a demand, only a chance for clarity." Daniel nodded, feeling a mixture of calm and nervousness. That evening, he met Mara near the edge of the village. She looked thoughtful, as if she had been waiting for the right moment to speak. "They told you about the ceremony?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied. She sighed quietly, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I want you to know something. No matter what you decide, I will respect it." Her words were simple, but Daniel understood the strength behind them. She was giving him freedom, even though she might be hoping for a certain outcome. They walked together slowly along the path, listening to the sound of insects and distant laughter. The silence between them felt comfortable, yet filled with unspoken emotions. Over the next few days, preparations for the ceremony filled the village with energy. People decorated the central gathering space with handmade ornaments and colorful fabrics. Children practiced songs, and elders prepared traditional food. Daniel helped wherever he could, but he felt like an observer standing at the edge of something important. During one afternoon, he spoke with another elder who shared stories of past ceremonies. Some involved celebrations of marriage. Others honored people who chose different paths. The elder emphasized that every decision was respected. "Our traditions exist to guide hearts," the elder said calmly, "but a heart must choose its own direction." Those words stayed with Daniel as he walked home. That night he found himself thinking about his past more deeply than usual. He remembered times when he had avoided relationships because he feared losing independence. He had built walls around himself, believing that distance was safer than vulnerability. Now, standing at the edge of a possible new life, he questioned whether those walls had protected him or simply kept him lonely. Meanwhile, Mara prepared quietly in her own way. She spent more time with her child, ensuring life felt normal despite the approaching event. She also spoke with elders, making sure Daniel would feel no pressure. When they met, their conversations became more honest. They shared memories, hopes, and fears, without pretending to have perfect answers. One evening they sat near a small fire while the sky turned deep blue. "Do you regret saving him?" she asked suddenly. Daniel looked at her, surprised. "Never."
She smiled softly. "I didn't think so."
"But I wanted to hear you say it." He paused before adding, "I just didn't expect everything that followed." "Neither did I," she admitted. They laughed gently, the shared honesty easing the tension between them. As the ceremony approached, Daniel noticed that villagers treated him with quiet respect rather than pressure. Some offered encouraging words, while others simply nodded as if trusting him to find his own path. The night before the ceremony, he struggled to sleep. He walked outside and watched the stars, thinking about what truly mattered to him. He realized that his fear was not about tradition, but about making a choice that would change his life permanently. He thought about Mara, her strength, her kindness, the way she balanced independence with warmth. He thought about her child, whose laughter had slowly become a familiar part of his days. For the first time, he admitted to himself that leaving the village now would feel like losing something meaningful. The ceremony day arrived with clear skies and soft sunlight. People gathered in the central area, wearing traditional clothing mixed with modern styles. Music filled the air, creating an atmosphere of celebration rather than pressure. Daniel stood among them, feeling both calm and deeply aware of the moment's importance. Elders spoke about the meaning of courage, community, and gratitude. They told stories of past heroes who had faced difficult choices. Each story carried a lesson about listening to one's heart. When Daniel's name was called, he stepped forward slowly. The crowd watched with respectful silence. He felt no fear, only a deep awareness of how much his life had changed since the day at the river. Mara stood nearby, holding her child's hand. She did not look at him with expectation, but with quiet understanding. Daniel realized that whatever he chose would not erase what they had already built: trust, friendship, and shared memories. The moment stretched, filled with anticipation yet free from pressure. The morning air was crisp and still, a gentle sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting warm patterns on the ground. The village was awake, but there was a quiet sense of anticipation in the atmosphere. Today was the day that Daniel had both expected and feared. The day he would have to make a decision that could change everything in his life. As he stepped outside, he felt the familiar pull of the river, the place where it all began. The water flowed calmly now, its soft murmur almost soothing. He remembered the rushing current, the fear, and the instinct that had carried him forward. He had acted without thinking, driven by something deeper than reason, something that now felt like the starting point of a new life. He made his way toward the central gathering area. Villagers were already assembling, their conversations low, their faces filled with warmth and quiet curiosity. Children ran ahead, laughing and playing, their carefree energy creating a sense of calm. Mara and her child were waiting near the center, calm yet poised. Mara's presence, her steady composure, brought him a strange comfort. He realized just how much he had come to care for them, not because of obligation or tradition, but because of shared moments, trust, and understanding. The elders began the ceremony, speaking softly but firmly about the meaning of courage, gratitude, and connection. They recounted stories of past heroes who had risked themselves to save others, emphasizing that bravery created bonds that were to be honored, not forced. Daniel listened intently, absorbing every word, feeling the weight of history and the importance of his own actions. When the moment arrived for him to speak, Daniel stepped forward slowly. His heart beat steadily, but it was not fear that filled him. It was clarity. He realized that he had already made his choice long before this ceremony, in the quiet moments of shared work, laughter, and conversation with Mara. The bond he had formed with her and her child was not something that could be defined by law or tradition alone. It had been built by genuine care, respect, and a deep understanding of one another. He looked toward Mara, seeing her calm, encouraging eyes, and he knew he could speak honestly without fear. "I will stay," he said, his voice steady. "Not because the law requires it, but because I want to. Because I care for Mara and her child, and I want to be part of their lives." A quiet murmur ran through the crowd, followed by nods of approval from the elders. They understood the significance of his words. This was not a statement of obligation. It was a declaration of genuine choice. Mara smiled softly, relief and warmth in her eyes, while her child ran toward him beaming with happiness. Daniel stepped closer, extending his hand gently. Mara took it, and in that simple gesture the weight of uncertainty lifted. The connection between them was no longer defined by tradition alone. It was affirmed by trust and mutual respect. The elders continued the ceremony, sharing blessings and words of encouragement. They spoke of community, the importance of caring for one another, and the strength found in unity. Daniel listened, feeling a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. He realized that his life had changed not because of the law, but because he had chosen to embrace the connections he had made. As the ceremony concluded, villagers approached to offer congratulations and warm smiles. Children tugged at his hands, asking him to play, while elders offered quiet words of respect. Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had not only saved a life that day at the river, but he had also discovered the value of courage, empathy, and belonging. In the days that followed, Daniel settled fully into village life. He continued his work, helping with repairs and projects, but now with a deeper sense of purpose. Mara and her child became a central part of his daily life, and the quiet moments they shared, sharing meals, walking along familiar paths, or simply sitting together in silence, became precious and meaningful. Their relationship grew naturally, built on understanding. They laughed together, shared stories, and supported each other through challenges. Mara's child looked up to him as a guide and protector, and Daniel felt a deep sense of responsibility that he embraced willingly. Over time, Daniel became a respected member of the community. He learned more about the traditions, not just as customs to follow, but as lessons in respect, unity, and care. He realized that true honor came not from ceremony alone, but from living with integrity and compassion every day. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, Daniel and Mara walked along the riverbank, watching the water glisten in the fading light. The child ran ahead, chasing the last rays of sunlight, laughing freely. Daniel felt a profound peace. He understood that life could be unpredictable, that moments of courage could create connections beyond imagination, and that choosing to embrace those connections could lead to a life filled with purpose and love.
He looked at Mara and smiled.
"I'm glad I stayed," he said quietly. She smiled back, a soft warmth in her eyes.
"So am I," she replied. The river flowed gently beside them, a reminder of the day that had brought them together. What had started as a single act of bravery had grown into a bond that was stronger than fear, stronger than uncertainty, and stronger than tradition alone. It was built on trust, kindness, and shared life. A connection that would guide them into the future together. As night fell and stars began to appear in the sky, Daniel felt a deep sense of belonging. He had discovered something he had never expected: a family, a purpose, and a life intertwined with people who mattered deeply to him. And he knew that this new chapter was only the beginning of many shared moments, joys, and quiet, meaningful days in the village that had welcomed him as one of their own.